Welcome to the show. My name is Jeramy Poole, and I'm the host of The Moment, where we explore and celebrate the necessary transformational process you must go through to achieve a high level of success. Ladies and gentlemen, I have my good friend Gerald Hennessey with Bentley Kensington on the show today. So excited for this episode. Gerald, thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
You got it, buddy. Now, as you know, there it is. Now, as you know, the show's called The Moment.
Mm-hmm.
What would you characterize or consider or define as a defining moment that changed your life, that allowed you to become a successful real estate enthusiast, networker, investor, developer, all the above?
Yeah, I got started in real estate in about 2003 in the mortgage business, a lot like you did.
Yep.
And I had a number of clients that were real estate investors, and I was seeing their financials year after year. And I started realizing very quickly I was in the wrong end of the business in real estate.
Right? Yeah.
Seeing how much money that they made, it really was compelling. And for me in 2006, I bought my first home. And then the following year in 2007, by the end of the year, I ended up owning about 27 properties.
27 properties.
In 4 different states.
Holy smokes.
So I was single at the time and
I didn't
divorced.
know that, actually. I seriously didn't know that. So you went from 0 to 60 fast.
Very fast.
Wow.
Neck-breaking speed.
Okay.
It was a great time. I was flying, from here in Washington to California to Arizona to Nevada to Texas, all places where I owned properties.
Jeez.
And it was kind of like it clicked and I got it.
Right.
But then something happened. Everything changed. And for anybody that's been in the business for more than 10 years now remembers what happened in 2007, 2008.
Yes, we do.
When everything went like this, really fast.
Really fast.
Really fast.
Yeah.
I ended up watching $1.7 million in equity disappear in about 60 days.
In 60 days.
60 days. So summer of 2007, I started getting ready to sell some of these properties that I had purchased and fixed up. And I got appraisals done, and the values were coming back less and less and less on each and every one of them. Right. It was like the pain of 1,000 paper cuts.
Sure.
And I found myself in a situation where I couldn't get out of it even if I wanted to.
Wow. I
had to deal with the changing marketplace, and that it was permanent change. It wasn't like a temporary, for a month or two. I mean, this went on for years after the recession started, right? Wow. So I had to try to figure out solutions. Things weren't as simple as just buy a house and then fix it up and sell it.
Sure.
Now you had to add to that banks suddenly stopped lending in 2008. They really, even if you had great credit, they still weren't lending like they were prior to that.
Right.
But if you started letting go of some of these properties that you bought at the peak of the market, they're certainly not lending to you after that.
Sure.
And so for me, I had to deal month after month, day after day, in and out of dealing with these properties that I was now upside down on.
Wow. And
got stuck holding the bag, all because I got a little too excited in the beginning of it.
Sure.
So for me, it was like I was just compelled to try to figure out, number one, what happened? Mm-hmm. How did I go from 0 to up here to how did I lose all that again?
Right,
And
right.
so it was almost like there was a moment somewhere in there for me where I was stuck with real estate. It was like I was married to it.
Sure.
And I knew at some point in there that I was going to be doing it the rest of my life.
That's good.
Dealing with real estate, investing or developing in one way, shape, or form.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So you've done and have been a part of some really exciting projects. I know that you're also a enthusiast of Tacoma as well. Mm-hmm. And recently, you've been involved in a really exciting project, City Hall. Mm-hmm. How do you see yourself being involved in the continued development of Tacoma going forward as an investor? Well,
City Hall was a really great experience. We're actually right down the street from it right now, where we're filming, and I've driven past that building so many times over the years, and I always wondered, why is that building empty? It's such a great building. There must be something wrong with it.
Right.
And then I saw the press release that the city of Tacoma put out that they were looking for someone to purchase the building because McMenamins, who was in contract to purchase it, ended up overspending on their Elks Lodge redevelopment by significant numbers, significant enough to where they had to fully pull out of Old City Hall.
Sure.
And so I signed up to go on the private tour that the city was offering, and Then I met a few other professionals in the business and met with our architect and started looking for a plan that would pencil and looking at some of the potential issues that building has. I mean, it needs a lot of work, to say the least,
does.
right? It's at the verge of falling down even as we speak right now. It's on fire watch multiple times per day from the fire department. They have to go past there because there's no electric power, there's no plumbing, and there's no seismic support for the building. So if there's an earthquake right now, that whole thing's coming down.
Oh, geez.
And so we started looking at a lot of these things, and then next thing you know, the proposal starts coming together.
Yeah.
We met with a large contractor in the area that could handle a job like that. We met with our architect. We put together plans. We hired on historic specialists, architect specialists, and engineering firms that are local here in Tacoma as well. And next thing you know, we had a 7-company team on our development team.
And so this was your first project of this scope.
Yeah. Yeah, for me being in real estate for 12 years now, I focused on single family for so many years. And I think after a long enough time of doing anything, I think you look for a change after a while.
Well, you know, to speak to who you are as a business person and your intellectual abilities, one thing I've become acutely aware of is that you're a pretty sharp guy.
Thanks.
and for you to go from residential to such a magnitude of a project and be able to wrap your brain around it, just having in-depth conversations with you about it time and time again, like, there's a lot to know, and you definitely have the kind of brain capacity to take a project like that on. And so my next question would be is from that experience, how do you plan to approach large commercial projects like that in the future, or do you?
Yeah, since then, so what ended up happening with that project, just so everybody understands, is that the city had like on a scale of 100 points possible, they made it kind of a contest to who gets chosen just to negotiate for the project. And we ended up getting second place with a score difference between first and second of only 7 points.
Wow.
And when we debriefed with the city about that afterwards, one of the things that they shared with us was that the difference in how we proposed to finance the whole thing was what made that difference. They are kind of accustomed to a single investor that has significant collateral to be able to borrow that amount to do the whole thing.
Sure.
But one of the things that they hadn't considered was that they overpaid for the property in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
It was only worth $1.6 million, and they paid $4 million to purchase that building. The reason why they did that is because that was what the owner, one person, had demanded as a sales price for that building.
Gotcha.
And he was leaving it derelict to fall apart. I mean, the roof was leaking everywhere. There was water damage. I mean, that place was coming down soon. So the city had to act quickly.
Jeez.
And so part of our proposal was to put it into the hands of the people out there, multiple people, not just one person. That way, if one person gets cold feet, pulls their funding, or decides to stall the project in any way, shape, or form, there's a whole panel of other people that are on board that can pick up the ball and run it into the end zone and get it completed.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Great point.
Yeah.
And so they decided that was not...
Well, I guess they weren't as familiar with the
That kind of
depth and
financing.
breadth of
Yeah.
that kind of a concept. You know, they're a lot of times when you're dealing with the government, they're used to what they're used to.
Sure.
And so,
And if you change status quo, it's kind of scary.
it might be a great idea,
Right.
but they're not exactly excited about doing things new.
Right.
They like doing things the way that they've experienced over years. And so we certainly are excited about the developer that was chosen, and we support what he's doing, and we really hope it works out for him.
Fantastic.
But if it doesn't, we stand ready to jump in and help at any time.
Okay, so in the case that the chosen candidate is not able to pull it off for whatever reason, you guys are willing to step up and still do exactly what you propose.
Exactly. So it's not over yet.
Okay.
They're in negotiations for a contract with the city right now.
Gotcha.
They haven't bought it yet. So
okay.
So we'll see what happens there.
So what's the timeline on that, on when they would actually put that into play and when you might be able to step up?
So back in September of 2018 here, they had mentioned something about January 2019, that they were trying to have it hashed out by then.
So right around the corner then.
So we'll see what happens.
Are you still hopeful, or?
You know, it's really hard to say because I'm hopeful that no matter what, that the project is
Somebody
gonna be
does
handled.
something with
Somebody's going to do so. It's too
That's
beautiful
the
a
right
building. It's
mindset.
unique. You cannot rebuild that building.
Right.
If you
Yeah,
tried
it's
to
a
do it
fair-
today, it would be cost prohibitive
Sure,
to try and rebuild
sure.
it the way it is. You
That's
know?
awesome.
And so there's so many magical things about that building. And when we toured it, I mean, there's 127 years of history around every corner of that building.
Certainly.
There's safes that are built into the wall,
Beautiful
into the brick
safes,
walls.
yeah.
There's jail cells that are over 100 years old down in the basement. And there's just so many things around every turn and corner that they just don't make buildings like that anymore.
Right.
And so it's pretty magical. And so getting back to your question, from this project moving forward, now it's opened our eyes to so many other buildings that are in Tacoma, both
Okay.
downtown and some of the other areas.
Okay.
One of them in particular that we've got our eyes on right now is the Hostess building, the Wonder Bread building on Sprague and 6th Avenue.
You mentioned
in
that
Tacoma.
before. What about that project turned you on?
You know, I love history itself.
Okay.
And things of historical value. Now, that building was the birthplace of Wonder Bread. You know, the white bags with the colored balloons on it?
I did. Yeah.
Who would have thought it was born
Right.
in Tacoma?
Oh, it was actually born and
at
started.
that facility.
Interesting.
It started at that facility for many years. It was
Okay.
distributed from there until they expanded, the Hostess company.
That's cool.
So now we're working on some viability for what is best to do with that building, because what we're finding across the board is that the old methods of having these urban industrial areas separated from residential
Sure.
has been more problematic than the original planners might have thought it would be.
Right.
Right. So you'd think that by putting an industry over here and residents over here, that they can enjoy the quiet and not have to deal with the noise of it all. But the fact is, when you have these areas of industrial that are and commercial, that's all they are,
Right.
you end up, you know, at the end of the day, there's nobody there at night.
And the world has changed. It's no longer factories and railroads and all of that.
Mm-hmm. So we have an abundance of these properties that are empty now, that are no longer viable for anybody to use.
Sure.
And so even the rates for commercial have come down, I mean, so low that it's really hard to invest in a property that's an office or a warehouse, because you're not really going to make a whole lot of money on it.
Makes sense.
But housing is something that we always need.
Makes
Our
sense.
population is always growing. And so we've been working with our architect, Ben Ferguson, which has also been on this show,
Yep.
to focus on how we can redevelop and reimagine new uses for these old properties. Just like the building that we're in right now.
That's
That you
fantastic.
had mentioned is, you know, finally the right people came along. They had a plan that pencils as far as from an investment standpoint, because
Sure.
the bottom line is, who's going to put up the money to do something unless it's going to pay them back handsomely?
At the end of the day, it absolutely has to pencil. So with your recent experience and account, how do you plan to approach future projects?
So now, instead of focusing on single family residences, you know, the market's kind of changing right now and pivoting. And so by looking at opportunities to develop, we're finding things that we can get more excited about than just the same old flip a house and
I love that.
and throw it on the market.
Right.
And so we're looking at a property on 6th Ave right now as well,
Okay.
where there's some commercial up front and there's an empty lot in the back that would be perfect for an apartment complex. We're looking at a lot of these other buildings like the Hostess Wonder building that we were talking about, where
Right.
we would have some retail marketplace at the ground floor level.
That's incredible.
With residences up top.
Right, just classic stuff that you would see all day, every day in California.
Yeah. These things are catching on,
Sure.
you know, internationally, as a matter of fact, all over the place, where people are realizing that it's not necessarily about having that house in the suburbs and the office that you commute to in the city,
Yeah,
but instead shortening that gap and shortening that distance where people like to live where they work.
absolutely.
And staying put.
I love that. I love that. And we need that so much down here. Here's a question that I've been really excited to ask you about, because you're definitely in the middle of it. You're an investor. You know so many investors. You talk their language. I mean, that is your universe. How are you experiencing changes in the shifting market in regards to attitude and appetite from seasoned investors?
That's a great question. We've certainly been experiencing quite a bit these days. 2017 was quite an interesting year here in the Pacific Northwest. The equities and values were still screaming high. Demand
Right.
was high. Inventory was low.
Yep.
That created a recipe for what we experienced, which was just values going up, skyrocketing, and a really high demand on the retail side too. We started seeing some indications last summer of a peak marketplace in the areas such as higher labor costs on renovation work and construction work, the lack of availability of workers. So we had a lot of holes to fill.
Sure.
And then even material costs started to go up. And it's kind of interesting when you've been through something before in life, and you see some of the hallmark indicators of that going off. Your radar starts going off, and you're going, "Wait, what's going on here?" Right. And it's kind of like that game of musical chairs, and the investors are the ones dancing around.
Yeah.
And if you don't end up with a chair, if you're holding inventory when the values are going down like they are right now, you're seeing what we're seeing now. Whereas a lot of investors are no longer buying properties because they're still stuck with the ones that they own.
Sure. So here's a question on that topic that I'm interested to hear from you is, once these investors offload their current inventory, do you expect them to reinvest it, or do you think that they're going to stay on the sidelines and wait to see what happens?
A lot of them are already staying on the sidelines.
Okay.
They've cashed out and they're staying cash heavy and inventory low. And it's kind of crazy. I mean, when you look at just year over year from last year to this year, and you look at the amount of inventory that's on the market, wow, what a difference.
What a difference. So here's another piece that I'm really excited about. All these individuals are going to slowly but surely offload their inventory and be cash rich. They still have appetites, right? So where are they going to focus their time and energy and money?
That's a great question. And what we see is these new trends of development.
Yes.
So instead of the same, I'll flip this house and flip that house, now we're looking at properties that are interesting and exciting. And what I remember from when this recession, I guess for lack of a better term, happened 10 years ago, is that when it became difficult to determine what the value of a property is, that everybody kind of throw their hands up in the air and say, what is it actually worth?
Right.
Because it's kind of like catching a falling knife.
You're
going to get cut.
Great analogy. Yeah.
And so everybody's trying to avoid that. And the best way that we avoided that 10 years ago was by going with income-related approaches to purchasing investment properties.
Sure.
So instead of looking at this is what the after-repaired value of a property is, we're looking at what is the income going to look like on that property.
Sure.
And then approaching calculating the returns based on income instead of equity.
So based on that, are you expecting individual investors to start to pull together into syndications and actually form funds and groups and start buying larger projects and trying to make money that way?
We're seeing that already with our investment firms. So we have a lot of investors that we've worked with over the years.
Okay.
And it's kind of this conundrum with being an investor that you're either really good at an investor or you're really good at finding deals.
Sure.
Right? It's very seldom that you actually are good at both. So over the years, we've been really good at finding the deals and attracting motivated sellers to contact us.
Okay.
But we can't take on every single deal.
Yeah.
Nor would we want to.
Sure.
Right? And so part of helping to recoup some of those marketing and advertising costs is to offer some of these properties to our partners. What we've seen in the last few months here in 2018 is that a lot of these partners that used to purchase from us all the time for a small markup, they're now passing on some of these deals because of the uncertainty. They're not sure of where things are going.
Absolutely.
So this makes it more important for people to team up.
Team up together.
Because if you're taking on 100% of the risk as an investor, what happens if it goes wrong?
Right.
But if you're spreading your risk now over a group, chances are that you're not going to be facing that same amount of risk. And if things do go wrong, everybody doesn't get hurt as badly as if they were in it on their own.
Certainly.
So, and moving forward from that, getting into some of these bigger developments that have more of a hardiness to the market, because we're approaching it from an income and not from a resale standpoint.
Sure.
That seems like the magic sauce going forward.
Love it. Great stuff. Great insight. You had great success using video on your last big project with City Hall, a video that we made for you. How do you plan to use video going forward? Because you got a lot of attention from that.
Well, I'll tell you, it's becoming more and more important.
Okay.
As each day that goes along, dovetailing with the comments about the current marketplace that we're in, you know, like a year ago, when we finished renovating a property, we would just throw it on the market empty. We wouldn't stage it.
Sure.
You could even probably miss a few things here and there, and it would still be
But
buying
you wouldn't
it.
do that.
They'd be paying over market value
Yeah,
for it, you
yeah,
know.
Yeah.
But now that's not the case anymore.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's going to be the case for some time to come
Sure,
now,
sure.
years. And so when we look at like just last month, the numbers for King County in Washington here, you know, they talk about how somewhere along out of 1,000 listings, there was only 100 sales.
Wow.
You
Wow.
know,
That's scary.
That's scary.
That's scary.
So now you're talking about 10% of all the property, only 10% of the listings are selling. So now, in order for your property to sell, how do you rise to the top of the cream to that top of that
Sure.
10% to get your property sold? Well, it's certainly not by leaving a property empty. But then, you know, we've also found that by staging these properties, that's not enough either.
Right.
It's not enough.
Wow.
We have to be able to convey some of the features and the great parts of the property, and not just through walking through the property, doing a walkthrough video with your cell phone.
Sure.
You know,
It has to be of high enough quality
Sure.
to represent not only the project, but also the individuals behind the project.
It has to be well thought out.
It has to be well thought out.
And you have to be thinking about what is the highest and best use for that property. And that's always our approach with any property.
Sure.
Is what is the highest and best use for this property? And so once we discover that, now it's up to, you know, professionals like yourself that are in this business, with regard to video particularly,
Right.
to help script that out and plan that out and find how do we showcase those features so that we can get it in front of the right buyer.
In front of the right
that can
buyer.
see it and go, okay, that's the one I want.
That's it. That's it. Another great question for you. You and your wife, who is a agent, realtor, have worked together for a long time and are business partners and do that very, very well. What kind of advice could you give to me or to anybody else out there who's operating a business with their spouse?
Yeah, I love my wife, Chelsea. She's sure been a great help over the years, you know.
Yeah, I'm sure she has.
She's a great mother.
She's fantastic.
But, you know, the first thing I would start off with is saying, you know, keep it 100. You know, you hear that a lot out there, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, over the years, we've met a lot of couples.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, you know, have this mindset that it's a 50-50 relationship.
Sure.
But the truth is, you know, if each partner is only putting in 50%, what happens on a bad day when one or more has a bad day?
Right.
Now you're operating at less than 100.
Wow.
But if each party is putting in 100% of everything they got,
I like
then
that.
on a good day you have 200%,
Yeah.
and on a bad day maybe 150%.
Sure, sure.
So it's all about giving it everything you got, as opposed to, well, you do your half and I'll do mine.
Right.
Right.
That's great advice. I've never heard that before. That's fantastic.
Thanks. You know, the next thing I would talk about is, especially being in the real estate business with your spouse, is to remember to keep the love focused in the right direction.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is that it's really easy in real estate to fall in love with a property.
Yeah.
It was the first lesson that I learned in the business that I was taught was don't ever fall in love with a house. Because if it's not a sound investment, you'll lose everything in it.
Sure,
you know,
sure.
sinking more and more money than you should into it,
Yeah.
and so on. And so, don't fall in love with the property. Keep the love focused on your significant other. The third thing I would say would be to invest in your spouse and your family like you invest in your business.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting nowadays. You know, having a family and kids is not as popular as it used to be.
Sure.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work.
Why go through all that work when you can just not do all that work, right?
Yeah. Right.
But I was very fortunate, and my wife too. We were both very fortunate to have parents, you know, that sacrificed everything they had to raise us.
Sure.
And to give us a shot at having a life.
Yeah.
And it's so important to build that legacy over time,
It's awesome.
so that you have something more than just a pile of money and assets.
Right.
You know, because having money and assets and being successful is great, but unless you have somebody that's looking at you like you're an absolute rock star, like kids do,
Yeah.
and that they just the kind of what you get back from it is just immeasurable. There's nothing else that can compare to it.
That's
And so
incredible.
investing in that, just like a real estate business, is where it's at for me.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Gerald
Yeah.
Hennessey. Always a pleasure. And thank you for watching. Tune in next week, and we'll see you again real soon.